Let me tell you something I've never been able to shake. I've thought about it almost every single day for 11 years now. And the strange thing is, it didn't start with a bang. It started with a flower that wouldn't stay upright. That's it, that's how the worst morning of my life began. A crooked tulip. If you told me that by lunchtime I'd be lying flat on the pavement with my ears ringing and my hands over my head, watching a man in a tall black hat refuse to take a single step backward while the whole world came apart around him, I'd have laughed at you. I really would have. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me slow down. Let me take you back to the start because you need to feel the morning the way I felt it. Quiet, ordinary, almost boring. That's important. You'll understand later why I keep telling people that. My name's Charlie. Back then I ran a flower stall just outside the east gates of Aldermore Palace. Little green cart, striped awning, the whole thing. My dad ran it before me and his mum before him. 3 generations of us selling roses and daffodils to tourists who never really wanted flowers. They just wanted a picture of the cart with the palace behind it. I didn't mind. A sale's a sale. The palace sat right there across the road from me. This huge pale stone thing with black iron railings and gold tips on the gateposts that caught the sun every clear morning and threw little stars onto the cobbles. People say it looks like a postcard. It does. I stared at it for 30 years, and I still don't know how to describe it better than that. It just looks like the kind of place where important things are supposed to happen. Most days, though, nothing important happened. That was the joke between me and the others who worked the square. Nothing ever happens here, we'd say. The most exciting thing was when a pigeon landed on a guard's hat and the tourists went wild taking photos and the poor guard just stood there, eyes front, not blinking, while a bird sat on his head like he was a statue. The guards. I need to talk about the guards, because this whole story is really about one of them. If you've ever been to a place like that, you know the type. Tall black fur hats, red tunics, polished boots, white belts. They stand outside the gates in these little stone boxes or sometimes right out in the open, and they do not move. They don't talk to you. They don't smile. They don't react when you wave your hand in front of their face or pull silly faces or sing at them. And believe me, people try all of that and worse. For years I thought it was a bit of theater, honestly. A show for the cameras. Stand still, look serious, give the tourists their money's worth. I used to feel a little sorry for them, standing out there in the cold and the rain, baking in the summer under those heavy hats, while idiots in football shirts shouted at them trying to make them flinch. I was wrong about all of it, but I didn't know that yet. There was one guard I knew better than the rest. Well, knew is a strong word. You don't really get to know them. But I'd seen him so many mornings that he'd stopped being a uniform to me and started being a person. Tom. His name was Tom Ashworth. I only found that out properly afterward when his name was in every paper in the country. But before all that, before any of it, he was just the tall young one who worked the East Post more than the others. Here's how I learned his name, and I think it tells you everything about the kind of man he was. It was maybe a year before everything happened. Cold morning, late autumn, the kind where your breath hangs in the air. I was setting up the cart, half asleep, and I dropped a whole bucket of water down my own leg, soaked through, freezing, and I let out a word my mother would have smacked me for. And from across the road, very quietly, without moving his head, without breaking his stance at all, this guard said, "Rough start, mate." That was it, 3 words. He wasn't supposed to talk. He stared straight ahead the whole time, never looked at me. You'd never have known his lips had moved unless you were close. But he'd seen me, and he'd said something kind, and then he went right back to being a statue. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped another bucket. After that we had this little thing. Nothing much. I'd nod at him when I rolled the cart in at 5:30 in the morning before the tourists, when it was just us and the milk vans and the street sweepers. He couldn't nod back, but sometimes when nobody was around, I'd hear that low voice. "Morning, Charlie," barely a whisper, and I'd say morning back and we'd leave it there. I started making him a coffee. I wasn't supposed to. He wasn't supposed to take it. So I'd leave it on the corner of the low wall near his post, and when his shift ended and the relief came to swap with him, he'd pick it up on his way past. Cold by then, usually. He never once complained. One time I asked him why he did it. The standing still, the silence, all of it. I wasn't being clever, I genuinely wanted to know. It seemed like such a hard way to spend a life. He didn't answer for a long moment. I thought maybe he wasn't going to. Then, quiet as ever, eyes front, he said, "It's not about standing still, Charlie. It's about what you're standing in front of." I didn't understand that, not for a long time. I understand it now. Right, the morning. It was a Thursday in late spring. I remember because Thursdays were market days 2 streets over, so the square always had a bit more buzz to it, a bit more foot traffic spilling our way. The weather was that perfect kind that the city only gives you a handful of times a year: clear blue sky, warm but not hot, a soft breeze coming up from the river that smelled like cut grass from Wexham Park, just past the palace grounds. Wexham Park, you'll want to remember that name. It was a beautiful day. I want you to really sit with that, because afterward everyone talked about it like the sky had been dark, like there'd been some sign, some feeling in the air. There wasn't. It was the loveliest morning we'd had in weeks. Mothers with prams, school trips, whole crocodile lines of kids in matching caps holding hands 2 by 2, a busker over by the fountain playing something gentle on a guitar. Tourists everywhere, hundreds of them, all pointing their phones at the palace, at the gates, at the guards. At Tom. He was on the East Post that morning. Of course he was. I'd left his coffee on the wall an hour before, and I'd seen him do that tiny thing he did, a flicker, just the corner of his mouth, that I'd learned meant thanks. The flowers were good that day. I remember being pleased about the tulips, this batch of deep red ones that had come in fresh. Except one of them kept leaning, kept tipping out of the bunch no matter how I arranged it. Crooked little thing. I must have fixed it 5 times. I was fussing with that stupid tulip when I first noticed the van. I want to be honest with you. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. That's the part that haunts me. I looked right at it and my brain said nothing, nothing at all, just filed it away as one more vehicle on a busy street. It was a white van, plain. No writing on the side, which now I think back was a little odd for around there. Most delivery vans had logos, company names, something. This one was just white, a bit dirty. It pulled up across the road, past the gates, near the corner where the railings of the palace grounds met the start of the park path. There were yellow lines there. You weren't supposed to stop. But people did all the time, just for a minute, to drop someone off or check a map. So a van sitting there with its engine running didn't ring any bells. The driver got out. I noticed that vaguely, the way you notice everything and nothing on a busy street. A man in a gray hooded top and dark trousers. He got out, and he didn't go round the back to get a delivery, and he didn't go into any of the shops. He just walked, quick, head down, away from the van, back the way the traffic had come, and he didn't look back. He didn't look back. I keep coming back to that. People always look back at their car. You check it's locked, you make sure you haven't left your lights on, you glance over your shoulder out of habit. He didn't. Not once. He walked fast and he turned the corner and he was gone, and the van just sat there, empty, engine off now in the morning sun. And I went back to my crooked tulip. God help me, I went back to the flower. The first person to actually notice something was wrong wasn't me. It was a little girl. She must have been 7, maybe 8. Brown hair in 2 plaits, a yellow backpack shaped like a duck. She was on one of those school trips near the back of the crocodile line, and she'd stopped to look at something on the ground by the van. A coin, maybe, or a sweet wrapper. Who knows what catches a kid's eye? Her teacher was up ahead calling the group along. And the girl, she crouched down by the back of the van, and then she stood up and she had this look on her face. Confused. She said something to the teacher, pointing. I couldn't hear it from where I was. But I saw the teacher come back, a young woman, sundress and bend down to look at whatever the girl was pointing at. I saw the teacher's face change. That's a thing you don't forget. The exact moment a person's face stops being relaxed and becomes something else. It's fast. Faster than you'd think. 1 second she was the patient sort of tired you get with a class of kids, and the next second every bit of color had gone out of her and her mouth was open and she had her hand on the girl's shoulder, pulling her back, pulling her up and away from the van. I stood up properly then. I came round the front of my cart. I called over, "Everything all right?" The way you do, half wanting to help, half just being nosy. She looked at me, the teacher. She looked right at me across the road and she said one word, and I'll never forget the way she said it, like it didn't quite want to come out of her. Wires. There were wires. Coming out from under the back of the van, where the doors didn't quite shut. There was something taped, and there were wires, and there was a smell, a faint chemical smell that I'd half noticed and ignored. The way you ignore everything when it's a beautiful Thursday and you're worried about a tulip. I'd love to tell you I did something brave in that moment. I didn't. I just stood there. My legs went funny. The whole square carried on around me, the busker still playing, the tourists still snapping photos, the kids still chattering, and there was this little island of horror forming around one white van, and nobody else had caught up yet. But Tom had. I don't know how. He was a good 40 feet away from the van, at his post by the east gate, and he never moved his head. You'd swear he was staring at nothing. But he'd seen the teacher's face the same as I had. Or maybe he'd been watching the van since it pulled up. I've come to believe, knowing what I know now, that he'd clocked it the moment it parked, that he'd been watching it the whole time with that dead-ahead stare that I always thought was just for show. Watching and waiting and hopping. He was wrong. He wasn't wrong. Here's where it gets hard to tell in order, because everything happened at once and slow and fast all together, the way it does when your body floods with something it doesn't have a name for. A police officer appeared. There were always a couple knocking about near the gates, and one came jogging over, a young lad, radio already up to his mouth. He got to the teacher, looked at the van, and I watched him go the same shade of pale she'd gone. He started talking into the radio fast, words I couldn't catch. And then he started shouting at people to move. Move back now, get away from the road. His voice cracked on it. For a second, nobody listened. That's the thing nobody tells you about a real emergency. People don't snap into action like in films. They freeze. They look around to see if everyone else is taking it seriously before they're willing to. The tourists kept filming. A couple of them actually turned their phones toward the officer, toward the van, because to them it was just more spectacle, more content, the most exciting thing that had happened on their holiday. I started shouting too then. I came out from behind the cart, and I waved my arms and I yelled at the people nearest me, "Move, get back." And I knocked over my own bucket of tulips and they went everywhere, red flowers all across the wet pavement, and I didn't even look at them. And through all of it, the shouting, the radio, the first ripples of panic starting to spread through the crowd, Tom hadn't moved. He was still at his post. I saw the police officer turn and shout something at him too, because that's the instinct, isn't it? Get everyone away, everyone, including the man in the stupid red tunic, standing closest of all to the thing with the wires. And Tom didn't move. I remember thinking for one ugly second, what is wrong with him? Move, you idiot. Run. He was the closest living person to that van. If it went off, and by now we all understood what it was, he'd be the first one gone. There was a low stone wall and 40 feet of open cobbles between him and a bomb, and he stood there at attention like it was any other Thursday and he was waiting for a pigeon. I didn't understand it. I shouted his name, first time I'd ever said it out loud to him. Tom, Tom, move. And this is the part. This is the part I have told maybe 4 people in 11 years, because every time I try to say it my voice goes and I can't get it out properly. He looked at me. He broke his stare just for a second, and he looked right across that square at me, at Charlie, the flower seller who left him cold coffee on a wall, and there was no fear on his face. None. I keep waiting in my memory to find the fear there, and it's never there. He looked calm, almost gentle, like he was about to tell me rough start, mate, all over again. And then he looked back at the gates behind him, at the palace, at what he was standing in front of. And I finally understood what he'd meant. I need to stop there for a minute, not for effect, I just need to. Because what happened next is the part everyone thinks they know from the news, and they don't, not really, not the way I saw it. The cameras caught the after, the smoke and the sirens and the famous photograph that ended up on the front of every paper in the world. But they didn't catch the thing that mattered. They didn't catch what was in his face before any of it. They didn't catch the choice. People love to ask me, was he scared? Did he know? Why didn't he run? He could have run, everyone says it, he had time to run. He had time to run. That's the whole point. That's the entire heart of it. He had time. And he made a decision with that time, in about 2 seconds, with a child crying somewhere behind him and a busker's guitar still ringing out across the square and red tulips scattered all over the wet stones. And the decision he made is the reason I'm able to sit here and tell you about it at all. I'll tell you what he did. But not yet. My hands are shaking a bit and I want to get it right, because he deserves to have it told right. So let me catch my breath. And then I'll tell you about the moment the world went white and the man in the tall black hat who would not take a single step back from his post. All right, I've had a minute. Let me tell you the rest. When I left off, Tom had looked at me, really looked at me, the only proper look we ever shared in all those years, and then he'd turned his eyes back to the palace gates behind him. And I'd understood all at once what he was about to do, or rather, what he wasn't about to do. He wasn't going to run. Now I want to be careful here, because over the years this story has grown in the telling. People have made him into something he wasn't. They've made him into a film. A man who karate chopped a bomb or threw himself on it or pulled off some impossible thing. He didn't do any of that. He couldn't have. Nobody could. What he did was both smaller and 1,000 times bigger than any of that. He stayed. Let me set the scene properly, because the geography matters. You have to be able to see it. The east gate where Tom stood was the closest entrance to the children's wing of the palace. I didn't know that at the time, most people didn't, but behind those gates that morning, there was a charity event going on inside the grounds. A garden thing. Hundreds of kids from local hospitals had been invited in for the day, families, nurses, the whole lot, out on the lawns where the public never gets to go. There were marquees up. You could see the tops of them over the railings, white peaks against the blue sky. And you could hear it if you listened, that high, bright sound of a lot of children all being happy at once. The van was parked maybe 40 feet from Tom's post, and Tom's post was maybe 30 feet from that gate, and that gate led straight onto the lawn where the children were. Do the maths the way Tom must have done it, in those 2 seconds, with the police officer screaming at him to fall back. If he ran, if he did the same thing, the thing every instinct in his body and mine, and everyone's was howling at him to do, he'd save himself. But the gate behind him would still be open. And if that van went off, and the gate was open, then 40 feet and a low wall was all that stood between a bomb and a lawn full of sick kids in party hats. He couldn't move the bomb, he couldn't defuse it. He wasn't trained for that, and there was no time. No time for anything. But he could get to the gate. And he could shut it. I watched him go. He broke from his post, and I mean broke, because for a man who'd spent his whole career being absolutely still, that first movement was like watching a statue come apart, and he did not run away from the van. He ran toward the gate, which meant, for a second, he ran almost alongside the thing, closer to it, before he reached the iron. The police officer was still shouting. The crowd had finally started to move. A great ugly surge of people all trying to get away at once, prams jolting over the cobbles, the school kids scattered, that young teacher in the sundress with her arms wrapped round as many of them as she could hold. The busker had stopped playing. I remember that. The guitar just stopped mid-song, and somehow the silence where the music had been was worse than any shout. Tom reached the gate. It was one of the big iron ones, heavy, the kind that takes 2 hands and your whole weight to swing. It had been left open for the charity event, propped wide for the families coming and going. He grabbed it. And here's a detail the cameras never got because of the angle, but I had a clear line of sight and I'll see it till the day I die. As he was hauling that gate shut, a man came running out of it. A dad, I think, with a little boy on his hip. They'd heard the commotion. They were trying to get the boy away, out and toward the street, toward the danger, because they didn't know, how could they know, the danger was out here and safety was in there. And Tom, without stopping, without a word, while pulling that enormous gate closed with one arm, put his other hand flat on the man's chest and shoved him back inside. Back onto the lawn. Back toward the children. The dad stumbled, confused, probably furious, and Tom got the gate between them and threw his shoulder into it and it boomed shut, that huge iron clang, and he dropped the bolt. He locked the children in. That's the thing the headlines never quite captured. Everyone out here was running away from the van. Tom ran to the one place full of people who couldn't run, and he sealed them behind 8 feet of solid iron and 3 feet of stone wall, and he put himself on the wrong side of it. The outside. With the van. I was perhaps 100 feet away by then. I'd been moving back with everyone else, half dragging a French tourist who'd frozen up completely, this poor woman who just stopped dead in the middle of the square clutching her camera. I had her by the sleeve. I remember her perfume, of all things, lilies. I remember thinking she smelled like my own stall. I looked back. I shouldn't have. They tell you not to. But I looked back and I saw Tom standing with his back against the closed gate, facing the van, facing the open square. He'd put himself between the bomb and the gate, like even shut iron wasn't enough, like he was going to be one more wall with his own body. And then he did the last thing, the thing that I think about more than anything else. He went back to attention. I swear to you, with a bomb 40 feet away and his whole life measured now in seconds, he straightened up, heels together, shoulders back, chin level, eyes front. Exactly the way he'd stood every cold morning of every year I'd known him, while tourists laughed at him and pigeons sat on his hat. He stood his post. The gate was his post now and he stood it. I have never in my life seen anything braver. I don't expect I ever will. I didn't hear the bang. People don't believe me, but it's true, and apparently it's common. When you're close enough to a thing like that, your ears just refuse the sound. They shut it out. There's a gap where the noise should be. What I felt was the air. It hit me like a wall. A flat, hard, physical thing. A great invisible hand that picked me and the French woman both off our feet and threw us. I don't remember landing. One moment I was upright and the next I was on the cobbles with my cheek pressed to the cold stone and grit in my mouth and my arm twisted under me, and the whole world had gone this strange, dull silence, this thick underwater nothing, with just a high singing whine threading through it. Then came the heat, a wave of it rolling over us, gone almost as fast as it came. Then the rain. That's what it felt like the first second. Rain. Things falling out of the sky, pattering down all around me on the stones, except it wasn't rain. It was bits of everything, glass, paper, dirt, leaves stripped from the trees, all coming back down. And petals, my petals. The bomb had thrown my whole cart into the air, and the wind of it had carried the flowers up, and now they were coming down all over the square, red and yellow and white, drifting down slow through the smoke like the most beautiful, most terrible snow you ever saw. I lay there. I couldn't have moved if you'd paid me. I just lay there in the falling petals and the smoke and the silence, with my heart going like a drum I could feel in my teeth, and I thought, in the strange flat way you think when your brain's been rattled, I'm alive. I think I'm alive. And then, a half-second later, with my next breath, a thought so sharp it cut right through the fog. Tom. I don't know how long I was down. Felt like an hour. Was probably 20 seconds. Sound started to come back in pieces. First that whine, then a low roar that I slowly understood was a lot of people screaming all at once. Then closer things. A car alarm. Someone right near me groaning, glass still falling and tinkling somewhere. I got up. I don't know how. My legs didn't want to work and one of my hands was bleeding. A long shallow cut across the palm from the cobbles, though I didn't feel it for hours. I got up and I turned around and I looked at where the van had been, where Tom had been, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to look. Every part of me did not want to see what was there. The smoke was thick, black and gray, rolling, lit underneath by something orange. Where the van had stood there was a crater in the road, the cobbles all torn up and thrown, and the railings nearest it were bent right over, peeled back like something had taken hold of them and just folded them flat. I couldn't see Tom, I couldn't see the gate, I couldn't see anything but smoke. And I started walking toward it. I don't know why. Everyone sensible was going the other way, and there I was, this idiot flower seller with a bleeding hand, walking into the smoke calling a name. Tom, Tom. My own voice sounded miles away. A pair of hands grabbed me. The police officer, the young one, his face black with soot, blood coming from one ear, and he had hold of me and he was shouting. There could be a second one, there could be a second device. You have to get back. And I was fighting him, actually fighting him, because all I could think was that Tom was in there and somebody had to go and get him. And then the smoke moved. A breath of wind came up off the river. The same soft breeze that had smelled like cut grass an hour before, and it pushed the smoke sideways, just for a moment, just enough. And I saw the gate. It was still standing, buckled, scorched black, hanging crooked off one hinge but standing, still shut, still bolted, it had held. And in front of it, on the ground, there was a shape. I'll tell you now so you're not sitting in suspense, because I don't believe in being cruel with a story, even a true one. He was alive. When I reached him and the officer let me in the end or came with me, I genuinely can't remember which Tom was on his back on the broken cobbles, maybe 15 feet from where he'd been standing where the blast had thrown him. His hat was gone. His tunic, that bright red I'd seen 1,000 mornings, was torn and dark and wrong. There was blood, a lot of it. I'm not going to describe it. He was hurt very badly, worse than I understood at the time, and I'm not going to lay it all out, because the man deserves his dignity, and because you don't need it to feel what I felt. What I'll tell you is this. I dropped down next to him on my knees in the glass and the pedals, and I took his hand, the bleeding one of mine and the broken one of his, and I leaned over him and I said his name. And his eyes opened. They found me. Took a second, swimming, but they found me. And his mouth moved and no sound came out at first, and I leaned right down close, my ear almost to his lips, the way I'd leaned in all those mornings to catch his quiet morning Charlie. And what he said, I had to ask him to say it twice, and the second time it came out as barely a breath. What he said was, "Did the gate hold?" That was it, that was his question. Not am I going to be all right. Not what happened to my legs, not call my mum. He was lying there torn up on the stones, and the only thing he wanted to know in the entire world was whether the gate had held, whether the children behind it were safe. And I looked up at it, that black buckled bolted thing still standing against all sense, and behind it now I could hear them. The children, crying, frightened, but there, alive, all of them, every single one, not one of them touched, and I looked back down at Tom and I couldn't get the words out, so I just nodded. I nodded and I squeezed his hand. And he closed his eyes, and the corner of his mouth moved, that tiny flicker, the one that meant thanks, the one I'd spent years learning to read. And he said one more thing, so quiet I nearly lost it under the sirens that were finally screaming into the square. He said, "Then it's all right, then it's all right." Those were the last words he said to me that day. After that, the paramedics were on him, 2 of them, then 4, pushing me back, and I let them. I scrambled out of their way on my hands and knees, and I sat down hard against the bent railings, and I watched them work on him. I want to tell you, he opened his eyes again and gave me a thumbs up like in the films. He didn't. They got him onto a board and they ran him to the ambulance, and the doors shut and it was gone, lights and noise, weaving through the wreckage, and I had no idea, none of us had any idea, whether he'd live to see the next morning. I sat there a long while. Somebody put a foil blanket round my shoulders. Somebody else looked at my hand. I kept saying I was fine, I'm fine, see to the others, and they kept saying, "You're in shock, sir, just sit," and I suppose I was. I sat in the middle of it all and I looked at the square I'd worked my whole life, the square where nothing ever happened, and I tried to take it in. It was gone, not all of it. The palace still stood, scorched along one side but whole. But the corner where the van had been was a black ruin, and the road was torn open, and there was glass everywhere, every window for 2 streets blown in, and water running in the gutters from a burst main, and over all of it, settling, the last of my flowers. Petals on the smashed cobbles, petals on the foil blankets, petals in the soot. A single red tulip, somehow whole, lying right in the middle of the road like someone had laid it down on purpose. I think about that tulip a lot. You probably know about the photograph. If you don't, you'd recognize it the second you saw it. It's one of the most famous photos taken in this country in the last 50 years. It's in textbooks now. There's a print of it hanging in the hall at the guards' barracks, and another, I'm told, somewhere inside the palace itself. A press photographer had been across the square that morning, there to cover the children's charity event of all things. When the van went off, he did what photographers do, God knows how, with the world ending around him, he kept shooting. And he caught it. He caught the gate. The picture is of the gate after. That black, buckled, bolted iron gate hanging off its one good hinge, still shut, smoke curling up behind it. And through the bars of the gate, just visible, blurred, you can see color. The marquees, the lawn, a scrap of a child's yellow balloon still tied to something, bobbing. And in the bottom corner of the frame, on the wrong side of the gate, on the ground, you can just make out a shape in red. They called it the post. That was the headline, one word, over that photo on the front of every paper in the land, and then papers in other lands, and then the whole world. The post, because that's what he never left. I've never liked looking at it, to be honest with you. Everyone else sees a hero. I see Tom on the ground, and I know I was 100 feet away, and I know I lived because he didn't run. He lived. I'll say that plainly because I made you wait through 2 parts of this, and I'm not a cruel man. Tom Ashworth lived. It was a near thing, a very near thing. He was in the hospital a long time, and there were surgeries, more than I can count. And there was a stretch in the first few days where the news said he was critical, and I sat in my flat with the telly on and didn't sleep and didn't eat and just waited. The whole country waited. People left flowers at the gates, and isn't that something, people bringing flowers back to that ruined corner where my whole stall had just been blown into the sky. Thousands of them. They had to be cleared with vans of their own. There were so many. He lost a leg. I'll tell you that because he's never hidden it, and he'd not want me to. Below the knee. And there was damage to one hand, and his hearing on one side was gone for good, and there were scars that the tunic used to cover that it can't cover anymore. He paid for that gate. He paid a price most of us can't imagine. But he lived. And here's the part I love most, the part I save for the end when I tell this, because it's the truest thing I know about the man. When he was well enough to talk to the papers, and they all wanted him, every single one, they offered him money, they offered him everything, he gave exactly 1 interview. 1. And the reporter asked him the question everyone wanted asked. Why didn't you run? You had time to run. And Tom said, and I've got the clipping, I've kept it 11 years, it's gone soft at the folds, Tom said. Running never crossed my mind. There were children behind that gate. My job was to stand in front of them. I just did my job. I just did my job. The most extraordinary thing a man can do, and he files it under doing his job. That's who he was. That's who he is. I should tell you what happened to the children, because that's the whole reason any of it mattered. Not one of them was hurt. Not one. Behind that wall and that gate, the worst of it was the noise and the fright and a few cuts from a marquee pole that came down. The dad Tom shoved back through the gate, the one with the little boy on his hip, the one who must have been so angry in that half-second he found me, months later, tracked me down at the new stall. He didn't say much. He couldn't. He just held my hand in both of his and he cried, this big man, just stood at my flower cart and cried, because his boy was alive and he understood now what the shove had been. His boy, I met him too, lovely kid, mad about trains. He drew a picture once for Tom, a stick man in a tall black hat standing in front of a gate with a sun in the corner and everybody smiling. Tom's got it framed. He told me it's the only medal he cares about, and he's got a fair few real ones now. I'm going to bring this to a close, because if I don't I'll keep going all night. I went back to the square. Took a while. They rebuilt that corner, repaired the railings, replaced the gate. They kept the old one though, the buckled one. It's preserved now behind glass in a little memorial just inside the grounds, and once a year they open it to the public and people queue down the street to stand in front of it for a moment. I've been every year. I stand in front of it the way he stood in front of those children, and I don't say anything, I just stand. I've got a new stall, same spot more or less, same striped awning. I still do it at 5:30 in the morning when it's just me and the milk vans and the street sweepers and the quiet. And every morning, I'm not ashamed to tell you, every single morning before I sell a single flower, I make a coffee and I carry it across and I leave it on the low wall near the east gate where a guard stands. Not Tom. Tom's retired now, of course, lives out by the coast. We have a pint when he's in the city. It's a different young one on the post these days. He doesn't know why I do it. He's not supposed to take it and I'm not supposed to leave it, so I just set it down and walk away. And sometimes, if it's quiet, if there's nobody around, I hear a low voice behind me, eyes front, barely moving. Morning, Charlie. And I say morning back. And I think about what Tom told me all those years ago before any of us knew what was coming. I asked him why he did it, the standing still, the silence, the whole hard life of it, and he said it wasn't about standing still. It was about what you're standing in front of. I didn't understand it then. I told you that. I understand it now. Because we all stand in front of something. Our families, our friends, the people who will never know the danger we quietly step between them, and most of us never get tested on it. Most of us never have to find out in 2 seconds on an ordinary Thursday whether we'd run or whether we'd stay. Tom found out. And he stayed. So that's my story. That's the day the world went white, and a man in a tall black hat would not take a single step back from his post. People ask me if I believe in heroes after all that. And I tell them no, not the way they mean it, not capes and films and karate chops. I believe in the gate that held. And I believe in the man who held it.